6 months had passed since the confrontation with Inspector Torvin, and Park's kitchen had become something legendary on Korath 7 word, had spread across the station about the restaurant where strangers had stood together against hegemony authority, and business had more than doubled. They had to expand into the neighboring unit just to fit all the customers who wanted to eat in the place, where humans had taught the galaxy what community means. Sivitha stood at the prep station, her knife moving with confident speed as she chopped vegetables for the evening service. Her scales had regained their natural shimmer of green and gold, and her tail curled with contentment as she worked. She had gained weight and strength in the months since Yuna had pulled her from the alley, and her large eyes no longer held the haunted look of someone waiting for disaster. She was no longer a Kea. Dishwasher Yuna had promoted her to prep cook after she demonstrated an unexpected talent for flavor combinations. Velther cuisine was built on principles that humans found strange but fascinating, and Sivitha had begun developing fusion dishes that brought customers back again and again. The soup needs more heat, Dorian said as he passed behind her with a pot of stock. The cash and trade delegation is coming tonight, and they like their food spicy. I will adjust, Sivitha replied, already reaching for the container of ground peppers. Tell Mrix to prepare extra portions. Cassians eat twice as much as they claim. Dorian laughed and continued on his way, and Sivitha smiled at the easy rhythm of the kitchen around her. This was her home now. These people were her family, not through blood or obligation, but through choice repeated day after day until it became unbreakably. Yuna had taught her that a kitchen was more than a place to cook food. It was a place where broken people came together and became whole. It was a place where strangers learned to trust each other through the simple act of sharing meals. It was a place where the galaxy's harshness could be held at bay for just a few hours, while the warmth of good food and better company reminded everyone what life was supposed to feel like. The evening rush came and went in a blur of orders and plates and the satisfying chaos that Sivitha had learned to love. When the last customer finally left and the lights dimmed to signal closing time, she helped Dorian and Mrix clean the kitchen while Yuna counted the day's earnings. Record profits again, Yuna announced with satisfaction. At this rate, I will have to hire more staff, maybe expand the menu, add some of Sivitha's fusion dishes as permanent options. Really? Sivitha asked, unable to hide her excitement. Your creations have been selling out every night. Yuna said, the customers love them. It is time to make them official. Pride swelled in Sivitha's chest, and she ducked her head to hide the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. 6 months ago, she had been starving in an alley, waiting to die. Now she was a cook with her own dishes on the menu of the most famous restaurant on the station. Humans had a saying about strange journeys, and hers was certainly one of them. She took the garbage out through the back door, humming one of the human songs that Dorian had taught her. The alley was quiet and dark, just as it had been on the night Yuna found her, but something moved in the shadows near the waste container. Something small and frightened. Sivitha set down the garbage bags and approached slowly, careful not to startle whatever was hiding there. I can see you, she said softly. You do not need to be afraid. A figure emerged from the darkness, and Sivitha's breath caught in her throat. It was a young male from a hegemony species, one of the insectoid races with chitin shells and multifaceted eyes. He was thin, far too thin, with cracks in his shell that spoke of severe malnutrition. He was a refugee, just like she had been. Please, he whispered, and his voice was barely audible. Please do not call the authorities. I just wanted to find something to eat. I have not eaten in 6 days. Sivitha felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a cloak. This was a member of the species that had nearly sent her to a processing facility his people served the hegemony that oppressed worlds like hers, that destroyed ecosystems for profit, that treated non-citizens as disposable labor. She had every reason to walk away. He had every reason to let him suffer the way her people had suffered under his government's policies. But that was not who she wanted to be. That was not what Yuna had taught her. "What is your name?" she asked. The young male hesitated, clearly expecting a trap. "Chitrik," he finally said. "My family was killed when our colony was attacked by raiders. I have been alone for 3 months. I have nowhere to go." Sivita extended her hand, just as Yuna had extended hers on that night 6 months ago. "Come inside," she said. "I will bring you something to eat." Chitrik stared at her hand with confusion and fear. "Among my people, accepting generosity creates obligation," he said. "I cannot take on a debt I have no way to repay." Sivita smiled, and she felt the echo of Yuna's words flowing through her. "I am not your people," she said. "I learn from humans, and they do not believe in debt for kindness. I am going to feed you because you are hungry, and I have food. That is all there is to it." She led him through the back door and into the kitchen, where Yuna was just finishing her paperwork. The human woman looked up and saw the starving hegemony youth, and her expression shifted through surprise, understanding, and finally approval. "Soup?" Yuna asked. "Soup," Sivita confirmed. She guided Chitrik to the same stool in the corner where she had once sat. Trembling and afraid, she placed a bowl of steaming liquid in front of him. "The same soup that had saved her life half a year ago. Eat first," she said. "We talk after." Chitrik lifted the bowl with shaking hands and drank, and tears began to leak from his multifaceted eyes. "Why are you doing this?" he asked between gulps. "My species has done terrible things to worlds like yours. You should hate me." Sivita sat down across from him, just as Yuna had once sat with her. "I do not hate you," she said. "You are not responsible for what your government does. You are just a hungry person who needs help. And helping hungry people is what we do here." Chitrik finished the soup, and Sivita refilled the bowl without being asked. "What happens now?" he asked. Sivita looked at Yuna, who nodded with a warm smile. "Now I offer you a job," Sivita said. "We need someone to wash dishes. The work is hard, the hours are long, and the pay is not great. But you will get 3 meals a day and a place to sleep until you find something better. No debt, no obligation. Just honest pay for honest work." Chitrik stared at her as if she had offered him a planet instead of a position washing dishes. "I do not understand," he said. "How can you help someone you do not know? What do you gain from this?" Sivita reached across the table and took his hand. "Someone did this for me once," she said. "They saved my life and asked for nothing in return, except that I passed the kindness forward when I had the chance. Now it is my turn, and someday, when you meet someone who needs help the way you needed it, you will remember this moment, and you will choose to help them too. That is how it works. That is what humans taught us." Chitrik's grip tightened on her hand, and his whole body shook with emotion he could not express. "Yes," he whispered, "I accept." Yuna watched from the kitchen doorway, with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face. This was what humans had brought to the galaxy, not weapons or technology or conquest. They had brought the simple, revolutionary idea that strangers could become family through kindness freely. Given they had taught the galaxy that community was built one meal at a time, and they had proven that the most powerful force in the universe was not a warship or a weapon. It was someone who refused to let another person starve alone. Sivita led Chitrik to the storage room and showed him the cot where she had once slept. "Rest now," she said. "Tomorrow, I will teach you how to wash dishes without breaking them." She closed the door and returned to the kitchen, where Yuna was waiting. "I am proud of you," Yuna said quietly. I'm just doing what you taught me. Sivitha replied. Yuna shook her head. No, she said. You are doing what you chose to become. That is something no one can teach. That comes from who you are. Sivitha embraced her. This human woman who had given her everything. Thank you, she whispered, for saving me, for teaching me, for showing me that the galaxy can be better than I believed. Yuna held her tightly. The galaxy is not better, she said, but people can be. That is enough to start with. And in the warm kitchen of Park's restaurant, surrounded by the smell of good food and the presence of chosen family, Sivitha believed her. Sivitha pressed herself against the wall and tried to make her body as small as possible while she watched the confrontation through the kitchen window. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to find a back exit, to disappear into the stations. Lower levels before the security officers could catch her, but her legs would not move. Yuna stood alone in the dining area, facing Torvin and his officers with her chin held high and her hands steady at her sides. She did not look afraid, and Sivitha could not understand how that was possible. I do not know what you are talking about, Yuna said calmly. All my workers are properly registered. Lies, Torvin said, and his voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never been questioned. I received a report that you are employing a Velthari refugee without documentation. Such violations carry severe penalties under hegemony labor law. Your business license will be revoked, your assets will be seized, and you will spend the next decade in a rehabilitation facility. Yuna did not flinch. And what happens to the Velthari? She asked. That is not your concern, Torvin replied. She will be processed according to standard procedures. Sivitha knew what that meant. The processing facilities were labor camps in all but name, places where refugees worked until their bodies gave out and then were quietly disposed of. No one ever returned from a processing facility. I will not let you take her. Yuna said. Torvin tilted his head in what might have been confusion. You do not have a choice, he said. I have 4 armed officers and the full authority of hegemony law. You are one human with no weapons. What exactly do you intend to do? Yuna smiled, and there was something fierce in her expression that Sivitha had never seen before. I intend to stand right here, she said, and you will have to go through me to reach her. The security officers exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to handle this development. Violence against civilians required extensive documentation, and humans had a reputation for making things complicated. This is foolish, Torvin said. Step aside, or you will be arrested as well. Then arrest me, Yuna replied. But know this. Everyone on this station has eaten in my restaurant at some point. Dock workers, traders, ship captains, even some of your fellow inspectors. They know me. They know I feed people who cannot pay. They know I help those who have nowhere else to go. And they will remember how you treated me when you dragged me away in chains. Torvin hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, the door chimed and massive Cassian entered the restaurant. And Sivitha recognized Mrix immediately. I heard there was trouble, Mrix said in that deep, rumbling voice. I came to help. Mrix walked across the dining area and stood beside Yuna. 4 arms crossed over a broad chest. The security officers shifted nervously because Cassians had a well-deserved reputation for being difficult to subdue. This does not concern you, Torvin snapped. Leave immediately. Yuna fed me when I first arrived on the station. Mrix said calmly, I had nothing. She gave me food and work and dignity. Her concerns are my concerns. The door chimed again. Dorian rushed in, still wearing his cooking apron, with flour dusted across his face. I got here as fast as I could, he said, slightly out of breath. What do you need? Stand with us, Yuna said simply. Dorian moved to her other side without hesitation. The door kept chiming. A Velthari trader entered, an older female with bright scales and sharp eyes. Sivitha recognized her from the lower markets. Though they had never spoken, I heard the commotion. The trader said, "I know this woman. She gave my nephew a job when no one else would. I stand with her." Then came a human freighter captain with gray hair and weathered hands. Then came a pair of hegemony species dock workers who shuffled in nervously but stood their ground. Then came a family of refugees from a world Sivitha did not recognize. The children hiding behind their parents, one by one. The people of Korath 7 filled the small restaurant, and they stood together in a wall of bodies between Torvin and the kitchen door. Sivitha watched in disbelief as strangers risked their own safety for a woman who had simply fed them when they were hungry. This was not how the galaxy worked. This was not how anything worked. And yet here they were. Tarvin looked at the growing crowd with an expression that Sivitha could not read among hegemony species. Authority was absolute. When an official gave an order, citizens obeyed without question. Idea that common people would stand against the government to protect a stranger was simply not possible in his understanding of reality. "This is obstruction of justice," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "All of you will be charged." "Then charge us," the Valkyrie trader said. "Fill your prisons with everyone who ever ate a bowl of soup in this restaurant. See how the station functions when you have arrested half the workforce." The door chimed one more time anew. Jin walked in with a datapad in his hand and an expression of cold amusement on his face. "Inspector Torvin," he said smoothly, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding." He handed the datapad to the inspector. The Valkyrie female in question was registered 3 days ago through proper channels. Her documentation is complete and fully legal. You can verify it yourself. Torvin took the datapad and began checking the records with increasingly frantic movements, but no matter how deeply he searched, he found nothing wrong. The documents were perfect. The Nul Jin was very good at his work. "This is impossible," Torvin muttered. "I checked the system this morning. She was not registered." "Perhaps there was a processing delay," Haniel suggested with false sympathy. "Bureaucracy can be so slow sometimes." The security officers looked to their commander for guidance. But Torvin had no orders to give without evidence of a crime. He had no legal grounds to continue. "This is not over," he said to Yuna, and his voice was thick with barely contained rage. "I will be watching you. You are always welcome to eat here." Yuna replied pleasantly, "The soup is excellent today." Torvin turned and marched out of the restaurant, his officers following close behind for a long moment. No one spoke, then the entire crowd burst into cheers, and Sivitha finally allowed herself to breathe. She opened the kitchen door and stepped into the dining area, where Yuna was being embraced by what seemed like half the station. Thus, older Valkyrie trader caught her eye and nodded with recognition. "You are the one she saved." The trader said, "Yes," Sivitha whispered. "Then live well." The trader replied, "That is how you repay a gift like this. You live well and pass it on." Sivitha looked at Yuna, who was crying and laughing at the same time, while Dorian and Rix tried to describe the confrontation in excited voices. She looked at the crowd of strangers who had risked everything for a concept she was only beginning to understand, and she realized that humans did not help others because they were fearless. They helped because they chose to. Even when they were terrified, they built communities not through obligation or debt, but through countless small acts of kindness, repeated over and over until strangers became family. Sivitha crossed the dining area and threw her arms around Yuna. "Thank you," she said into the human woman's shoulder. "Thank you for not letting them take me." Yuna held her tightly. "I told you," she said. "We take care of our own." And for the first time in her life, Sivitha believed she understood what that meant. The lower markets of Korath 7 were a maze of narrow passages and flickering lights where the station's laws became more like suggestion. Sivitha followed close behind Yuna as they descended level after level, passing merchants who sold goods that would never appear on any official inventory. This was where people came when they needed things that did not exist. Yuna moved through the crowds with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. And Sivitha realized that the restaurant owner had secrets she had never suspected. The kind woman who fed strays and spoke of family had clearly spent time in places like this before. "We are almost there," Yuna said over her shoulder. "Let me do the talking. The person we are meeting does not respond well to strangers." They stopped in front of a door that looked exactly like every other door in the corridor. Yuna knocked 3 times in a specific pattern, and the door slid open to reveal a human male with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. "Yuna Park," he said, and his voice carried no warmth. "I wondered when you would call in that favor." "Haniel," Yuna replied with a nod. "I need documents for my friend here. Full registration, work permits, everything official." Haniel Jin looked at Sivitha with the calculating gaze of someone who measured everything by its price. "Lothary," he observed, "refugee class. No existing records in the hegemony system. That is not cheap work. Someone would have to build her identity from nothing. I know what it costs." Yuna said, "I am prepared to pay." She named a number, and Sivitha felt her stomach drop. It was more credits than she could earn in 5 years of work. It was more than her family had received when they sold her contract. It was everything. "That will do," Haniel said after a moment's consideration. "Come inside. I need biometric data and a few hours to build the framework." The room beyond the door was filled with equipment that Sivitha did not recognize. Screens displaying information that scrolled too fast to read. Haniel worked with efficient movements, scanning Sivitha's scales and eyes and collecting samples of her genetic material. He asked questions in a flat voice, creating a history for someone who had never officially existed. Where was she born? Who were her parents? What skills did she possess? Sivitha answered as best she could while Yuna watched from the corner of the room. "It will be ready in 2 days," Haniel finally said. "The documents will be perfect. Even a hegemony inspector will not be able to find a flaw." "Thank you," Yuna said, and she transferred the credits from her personal account. Sivitha watched the numbers disappear from Yuna's savings and felt something inside her break. They walked back through the lower markets in silence, and Sivitha could not stop thinking about what she had just witnessed. This human woman, who owed her nothing, who had known her for only a few weeks, had just spent a fortune to protect her. The debt bond that Sivitha's people would have demanded for such a gift would have lasted 3 lifetimes. "Why?" Sivitha finally asked when they reached a quiet corridor. "Why would you give everything for me?" "I have not given everything," Yuna said. "The restaurant is still mine. I still have enough to keep operating. It will be tight for a while, but we will manage." "That is not an answer," Sivitha pressed. "You barely know me. I could be anyone. I could disappear tomorrow and take your kindness with me. Why would you risk so much for a stranger?" Yuna stopped walking and turned to face her for a moment. Her expression was unguarded, and Sivitha saw pain behind her eyes that she had not noticed before. "I had a daughter," Yuna said quietly. "Her name was Minjung. She was about your age when she died." Sivitha felt her breath catch in her throat. An accident on Earth. Yuna continued. "A factory explosion near our restaurant. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I could not save her. I could not do anything except watch the news reports and wait for them to find her body." "I am sorry," Sivitha whispered, and she meant it more than she had ever meant anything. "After she died, I could not stay on Earth." Yuna said, "Everything reminded me of her. So I sold the restaurant and came out here to start again. I thought maybe if I ran far enough, the pain would not follow me." She laughed bitterly. "It followed me anyway, but somewhere along the way, I realized something. I could not save Minjung. But I could save others. I could feed the hungry and shelter the lost and protect the vulnerable. Not to replace her. Nothing could ever replace her. But because that is what she would have wanted me to do. Sivitha had no words. She had spent so long believing that the galaxy was cold and cruel. That kindness always came with a price, that no one helped strangers without expecting something in return. And here was this human woman, who proved everything she believed to be wrong. You do not owe me anything, Una said firmly. I do not want your service, or your loyalty, or your debt. I want you to survive. I want you to build a life for yourself, and maybe someday, when you meet someone who needs help the way you needed it, you will remember what it felt like, and you will choose to help them too. That is the only payment I want. Tears streamed down Savitha's face, and she did not try to stop them. I will remember, she said. I promise. Una smiled and took her hand. Good, she said. Now let us go home. I need to start the morning prep. And you still have dishes to wash. They returned to the restaurant as the station's artificial lights began their slow transition to simulate. Dawn Sivitha went to her small room in the storage area and lay on her cot. Staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything she had learned, she thought about Minjung, the daughter she would never meet. She thought about her own family, who had sold her to save themselves. She thought about the strange human concept of helping without expecting repayment, and she thought about what kind of person she wanted to become. Was just beginning to take her when she heard sounds from the front of the restaurant, voices, sharp and demanding, the heavy footsteps of multiple beings. She rose from her cot and crept toward the kitchen, her heart already pounding with fear. Through the narrow window in the door, she saw Inspector Torvin standing in the dining area. But behind him stood 4 station security officers in full armor, and Una was facing them alone. Una Park, Torvin said in his grinding voice. You are accused of harboring an unregistered alien worker and falsifying employment records. Surrender the Velthari female immediately, or you will be placed under arrest. Sivitha's blood turned to ice. Someone had reported them. Torvin had not waited for the 10 days he promised, and now everything was falling apart. The first week was the hardest thing Savitha had ever experienced, and she had survived abandonment on a space station. Her hands shook constantly from weakness, and the dishes seemed to slip from her fingers, no matter how carefully she held them. By the 3rd day, she had broken 7 plates and 2 bowls, and she waited with dread for the punishment that would surely come. But Una only showed her how to grip the dishes from underneath instead of from the sides. Like this, the human woman said, demonstrating with a plate. You support the weight instead of fighting against it. I broke my mother's entire tea set when I was 12 years old. She made me glue every piece back together. I learned more from that than I ever did from someone yelling at me. Sivitha did not understand the lesson, but she copied the grip exactly. The next dish did not slip. She had never worked in a kitchen before, and everything was new and overwhelming. The heat from the cooking surfaces made her scales itch, and the constant noise of orders being called and pots banging together hurt her sensitive ears. But she learned quickly, because she had no other choice. Failure meant returning to the streets, and she could not survive that again. The other workers at Park's kitchen watched her with curiosity at first, but they never treated her with cruelty. Dorian, the young human male who worked as the second cook, seemed incapable of silence. He talked constantly while he worked, sharing stories about his homeworld and asking Sivitha questions about hers that she did not know how to answer. So what's Velthar like? He asked one afternoon while chopping vegetables with frightening speed. I heard you guys have 3 sons. Is that true? We had 2 sons, Sivitha corrected quietly. The third was a gas giant that reflected light. It is gone now. Dorian paused his chopping. Gone? The ecological collapse, Sivitha said. and the words felt like stones in her throat. The corporation stripped our world of resources until the atmosphere could no longer sustain itself. Millions died. The survivors scattered across the galaxy. My family sold my work contract to traders so they would have enough credits to buy passage off-world. The kitchen went quiet, and Sivitha immediately regretted speaking. She had learned long ago that no one wanted to hear about the suffering of others. It made them uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people became cruel. But Dorian set down his knife and looked at her with something she did not recognize. "That's horrible," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I'm sorry." "Why are you sorry?" Sivitha asked. "You did not cause it, because it happened to you," Dorian said, as if this were obvious, and because someone should say it. Memrix. The four-armed Cashin, who handled the grill, made a rumbling sound of agreement. The large being rarely spoke, but when Mrix did speak, everyone listened. "The girl works hard," Mrix said to no one in particular. "She will be good." Sivitha did not know how to respond to kindness, so she returned to washing dishes and pretended she could not feel the warmth spreading through her chest. The days turned into weeks, and Sivitha began to understand the strained rhythm of Park's kitchen. Yuna ran the restaurant with a firm hand but never raised her voice in anger. She knew every customer by name and remembered their favorite orders without writing anything down when workers made mistakes. She corrected them without cruelty when they succeeded. She praised them openly. It was nothing like the work contracts Sivitha had known before. The traders who had owned her treated their workers like tools to be used and discarded. They fed their employees just enough to keep them functional and house them in spaces barely fit for animals. Yuna did the opposite of all these things. She fed her workers the same food she served to paying customers. She asked about their lives and remembered the small details they shared. When Dorian's mother became sick, Yuna gave him time off without reducing his pay. When Mrix needed to observe a Kashin religious holiday, Yuna closed the kitchen early so the whole staff could attend the ceremony. "Why do you do this?" Sivitha finally asked one evening as they cleaned up after closing. "These workers are not your family. You owe them nothing beyond their wages." Yuna scrubbed at a stubborn stain on the counter and considered the question. "When I was young," she said, "I worked in my mother's restaurant back on Earth. She taught me that a kitchen is not just a place where you make food. It is a place where you build community. The people who work beside you, who share your meals, who support you when things are hard. They become your family, whether you planned it or not. But they are different species." Sivitha protested. "Mrix is Kashin. Dorian is human. I am Velthari. How can we be family?" "Family is not about blood," Yuna said firmly. "It is about choice. Every day, you choose to be here. Every day. I choose to have you. That choice, repeated over and over, is what makes a family." Sivitha wanted to argue, but she had no words. The concept was too foreign, too strange, too wonderful to fit inside her understanding of how the galaxy worked. A chime at the front door interrupted them, and a tall being in official hegemony robes entered the restaurant. Siva's blood ran cold, and she retreated behind the counter without thinking. "We are closed," Yuna said, stepping forward with a pleasant smile that did not reach her eyes. "What can I help you with?" "I am Inspector Torvin," the being said in a voice like grinding metal. "Health and Labor Compliance Division. I am here for a routine inspection of your establishment." His eyes swept the kitchen and landed on Sivitha. "That worker," he said. "I do not have her registration in my records. May I see her employment documentation?" Yuna did not hesitate for even a moment. "Of course," she said smoothly. Sivitha was registered last month through the worker placement office. The paperwork is still being processed. You know how slow the bureaucracy can be. Torvin's eyes narrowed, and Sivitha knew he did not believe the lie. But Yuna held his gaze without flinching, and after a long moment, the inspector looked away. "I will return in 10 standard days," Torvin said. "If her documentation is not in order by then, there will be consequences. For both of you," he left without another word. And the door chimed again. As it closed behind him, Svetha's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor as terror washed over her. "He knows," she whispered. "He will send me to the processing facility." "I have to run." Yuna crouched down beside her and took her trembling hands. "You are not running anywhere," she said. "We're going to get you real documents. Legal ones that even Torvin cannot question." "How?" Svetha asked desperately. "I have no credits. I have no connections. I have nothing." Yuna's expression grew serious. "I know someone who can help," she said. "Someone who owes me a favor. But you need to trust me. Can you do that?" Svetha looked into the human woman's eyes and saw something she had never expected to find in this cold galaxy. She saw determination. She saw compassion. She saw the same fierce protectiveness that her own mother had shown before selling her contract to save the rest of the family. "Yes," Svetha whispered, "I trust you." Yuna smiled, but there was worry behind it. "Good," she said, "because this is going to get complicated." The smell of rotting food filled the narrow alley behind the restaurant, and Svetha pressed her thin body against the cold metal wall as she waited for the workers inside to leave. She had been watching this place for 3 days now, learning when they threw out the garbage and when the back door stayed unlocked. For those few precious minutes, her stomach twisted with hunger, and she wrapped her arms around herself to stop the shaking that never seemed to end anymore. The Valkyrie female was young, barely 19 cycles old by the count of her homeworld. Though that world felt like a distant dream, now her scales, which should have shimmered with bright green and gold colors, had turned dull and gray from weeks without proper food. The large eyes that her species was known for had sunk deeper into her face, and her tail dragged on the ground because she no longer had the strength to hold it up. Waystation Korath 7 was not a kind place for those without credits or connections. Thousands of beings moved through its corridors every day, trading goods and making deals. But none of them looked at the thin alien girl hiding in the shadow. Svetha had learned quickly that invisibility was her only protection. The authorities would send her to a hegemony processing facility if they found her, and everyone knew what happened in those places. She heard the back door open and pressed herself further into the darkness. A human woman stepped out, carrying 2 large bags of garbage, and Svetha held her breath. Humans were strange creatures. She had learned during her time on the station. They were soft and fragile compared to most species, with no scales or claws or natural weapons of any kind, yet somehow they had spread across dozens of worlds and built a reputation that made even the hegemony treat them with caution. The woman was middle-aged by human standards, with black hair streaked with gray and a round face that seemed designed for smiling. She wore a stained apron over simple clothes, and she hummed a tune to herself as she tossed the bags into the waste container. Siva waited for her to go back inside, but the woman stopped. She turned her head slowly, and her eyes found the exact spot where Svetha was hiding. "I can see you there," the woman said in the common galactic tongue, her accent marking her clearly as a human from Earth itself. Svetha's heart pounded against her ribs, and she prepared to run, but her legs would not obey her commands, and she realized with horror that she was too weak to flee. "Please," she whispered, and she hated how pathetic her voice sounded. "Please do not call the authorities." The human woman walked closer, and Svetha flinched back against the wall, but instead of reaching for a communication device, the woman crouched down so that their eyes were level. "How long since you ate?" She asked. The question was so unexpected that Svetha could not answer for a moment. 4 days, She finally admitted, "Maybe 5. I lose count." The woman made a sound that Sivitha did not understand. "Something between a sigh and a growl. Come inside," she said. And she reached out a hand. Sivitha stared at the offered hand as if it were a weapon among our people. Accepting food or shelter from a stranger created a debt bond that could last for years. Receiver became obligated to serve the giver until the debt was repaid. And some bonds lasted entire lifetimes. "I cannot," Sivitha said. Even as her stomach screamed at her to accept, "I cannot take on a debt bond. I have nothing to repay you with." The human woman tilted her head in a gesture of confusion. "A debt, what now?" "Debt bond," Sivitha repeated. "When one accepts generosity from another, one becomes bound to repay through service. It is the way of my people." The woman laughed. And the sound was surprisingly warm. "Well, I am not your people," she said. "My name is Una Park, and I run this restaurant. Humans do not do debt bonds. I am going to feed you because you are hungry, and I have food. That is all there is to it." Sivitha did not move. And Una sighed. "Look, you can sit in my kitchen and eat 1 bowl of soup," she said. "If you still want to run away after that, I will not stop you, but I am not going to stand here and watch a child starve in my alley. It is bad for business." The attempt at humor was lost on Sivitha, but the promise of food was not against every instinct that told her to flee. She took the human woman's hand and allowed herself to be pulled to her feet. The inside of the restaurant was warm and bright, filled with smells that made Sivitha dizzy. With longing, Una led her through a kitchen where 2 other workers glanced up with curiosity, but asked no questions. They seemed used to their employer bringing in strays. Una pushed Sivitha onto a stool in the corner and turned to the stove within minutes. She placed a bowl of steaming liquid in front of the starving girl. "Soup," Una said. "It is made for human digestion, but I checked the ingredients against the Valkyrie dietary restrictions on my database. It will not poison you." Sivitha stared at the bowl, and tears began to leak from her large eyes. She had not cried in months, not since the traders who owned her work contract had abandoned her on this station without a word. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Una pulled up another stool and sat down across from her. "Because I remember being hungry," she said. "Simply, now eat. We can talk after." Sivitha lifted the bowl with trembling hands and drank. The soup was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, and she finished it so quickly that she nearly choked. Una refilled the bowl without being asked, and Sivitha drank that too. When she finally set the bowl down, she felt more alive than she had in weeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Una said, and there was a serious look in her eyes now. "I have a proposal for you. I need someone to wash dishes and clean the kitchen. The work is hard. The hours are long, and the pay is not great. But you would get 3 meals a day and a place to sleep in the storage room until you find something better." Sivitha felt her scales flush with confusion. "You are offering me employment?" "I am offering you a chance," Una corrected. "What you do with it is up to you. No debt bond. Just honest pay for honest work." The concept was so foreign to everything Sivitha had ever known that she could not fully understand other people did not do things for strangers without expecting something in return. The galaxy did not work that way. Nothing worked that way. But she was too desperate to refuse. "Yes," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "I accept." Una smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. "Good," she said. "You can start tomorrow. Tonight. You rest." She led Sivitha to a small storage room at the back of the restaurant and showed her a cot with clean blankets. It was the first real bed Sivitha had seen in months. "Why?" Sivitha asked again as Una turned to leave. "Why would a human do this for a stranger?" Una paused at the door. "Because someone did it for me once," she said, "and because no one should have to starve alone. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, I teach you how to wash dishes without breaking them." She closed the door, and Sivitha sat on the cot and stunned. Silence. She did not understand humans. She did not understand. This woman who fed strangers and offered jobs to refugees and spoke of kindness as if it were the most natural thing in the universe, but for the first time in a very long time, Sivitha felt something other than fear. Felt hope, and that terrified her most of all.